Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
What do you want?
You and Keela break up?
Who told you that?
No one. I use body science. Why, is it true?
What's that fucking face?
It's called empathy, you dusty old fart. Look, as someone who's been dumped by Keela, I get it.
She didn't dump me.
You dumped her. Why?
I want to talk about it. Why'd you come in here? Oh, let me guess. You want to know if it's okay to ask her out, right?
No, I was just seeing if you were okay, man. Kid.
What the fuck are you doing?
I was gonna hug you.
You came at me too fast.
Jesus, sorry. Forgot how skittish elderly people could be because of the war.
What would Ted Lasso do? That's the question we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple Dabalia.
And I'm Jeff Harry. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you discover your own Lasso way and embrace what it means to believe.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we are talking about season 3, episode 2. I don't want to go to Chelsea. This one was written by Sasha Garin. She also wrote the episode Midnight Train to Royston, which we saw last season. And this one was directed by MJ Delaney again, who also directed last week's episode and so many others. So, yeah.
What is that fancy 80s music that shows up at the beginning of the show? I did not recognize that. What was that?
Well, thanks for asking, Jeff. I appreciate you. That was actually, it's called Lovely Day / Good as Hell Mashup by Pamplemousse. So that's the song that we hear. Again, there is a great site. We'll link to it again that lists out every single song in the show and where it shows up. So, yeah.
So it opens up with at KBJR. I don't even understand what exactly she does, but I'm assuming it's PR related.
Yeah, so it's KJPR.
KJPR.
Keely Jones Public Relations.
Even I can't. But it's fascinating because the CFO has already shown up at the beginning of the show, and like the staff is looking stiff as usual. And the CFO's like, so remember, the client pays over the shoot, so don't go over the amount, and that's clear. And I think Keely's just like, well, I hope don't we want the photo shoot to go well? And she's like, yeah, I guess we want that as well.
Yeah, it is interesting to see her dynamic with the CFO. And I think we see this in this episode quite a bit. I think people don't take Keely seriously, right? Like, if you remember in the past season, she showed up to Rebecca's office and she had like a planner with a unicorn on it or something.
Yeah.
And like Rebecca like gave her crap for that. And she was like, what, And so Keely is who she is. But even we see at the photo shoot, which we'll talk about afterwards, but where people are like, I don't think she does get it. And so
Right. And they're saying it right in front of her.
Yeah. Too. And so this is her firm, and the CFO is like running the show,
And it actually reminds me of the first season when Keely and Ted get along really early on. And I think they both get along really early on because neither of them are taken seriously, right? And if anything, they connect with one another. They start hanging out with one another because they believe in each other, right?
Yeah.
They actually want to hear each other's opinion, while everyone else is just like, whatever. I don't even understand what these people are doing.
And I sometimes feel like Keely's like the female version of Ted in a lot of ways, right? Like with her kindness and how she treats other people. And, I think she's a pretty curious person too, in terms of curiosity of other people and things like that. And she really tries to connect with
Yeah.
people. And I think
Yeah.
Ted does the same thing. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting observation.
So when she's trying to connect with him right before she leaves to go to the photo shoot, she goes, don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And then one of them's just like, what wouldn't you do? Like they are just that disconnected from joy and fun and Keeley. And they don't even probably understand what they're doing there. Right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what, I don't even know what job they have.
Yeah.
And just the distance between the desks, the energy in the room, it's just so drastically different. And yeah, that is what she's up against to start the show.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So I mentioned this last week, but I have it linked here and we'll definitely add it to the show notes. But there's this really interesting article that was written about like how they decided on the set design this time. And one of the things they talk about is how Keeley's confidence comes through her surroundings rather than through herself. And so you look at like every office that she's had or whatever, she makes it her own. So even this one, you walk into her office and it's just like, the fuzzy throw pillows and her pink cheetah and like all of that, right? And even the KJPR sign is like this fluorescent pink, But then you look at the rest of the office and it's very like bland and dead and quiet. And when I think public relations, and I could just be projecting, but like I think of people who are like talking to each other and like figuring out like, because it's all about putting stuff out into the public. And she introduces them to Rebecca last week as the poets behind KJPR, right? Like I think that's what she said. Because I guess they're writing all the stuff maybe, but like, yeah, it was just a very weird dynamic.
Well, even what the CFO said last time, where they were just like, you're spending $200 on flowers every week. And she's like, yeah, to brighten up the place.
Yeah.
And that seems like a lot for flowers, but also seems very little for a PR firm as well. So it's just like, I'm sure they spend millions of dollars. So, but she's just like, no, that's a line item that doesn't make sense,
Yeah, and the way she characterizes flowers, right? Like,
oh yes,
they're for like dead people and for funerals. I can't remember now. Something about like when people die and when relationships die. Essentially, it's like the two times for flowers.
Exactly. Yeah, I was like, where is that? There's, I'll find it and I'll let you know because I wrote that down specifically because I was like, flowers.
That was really funny. All right, so we start out.
Oh, I got it. Flowers are for dead people and dead marriages.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Oh, that's so depressing. Dead marriages. Yikes.
And that was when Rebecca responded, she seems fun.
Yeah.
And that was like a callback to Beard had said that at one point. I don't remember who he was talking about at that time, but same thing where he was like, oh, she seems fun. Oh, no, it was when Dr. Sharon first came.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And they were all in the office and she kind of like walked away afterwards. He's like, well, she seems fun. Which actually makes me think that, and also because of who this actor is, that Barbara will actually really come around and stuff. And we already see like Keeley like kind of connecting with her and stuff.
Right.
All right. So then we move into Rebecca's office.
Yeah. And they cheer when Ted walks in. There's like an extra cheer, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And so we see that Trent Crimm is back, which is exciting.
Trent Crimm, not from The Independent anymore.
Right. He is independent now, but not from The Independent. And he wants to write a book about the team. And so I will say this was a huge prediction in the Ted Lasso groups. A lot of people saying, oh, he's probably going to write a book. And he is writing a book. So, and nobody wants him to do this, but nobody wants to say it to him.
I love it. And they literally ask Ted, what do you think? And then they're just giving him all the gestures. And he's sitting there for a while, just like milking it, right?
Yeah.
No. Don't do it. Sure. And then he's like, I mean, geez. Sure. Why the heck not?
And I kind of feel like that's what you get. If you don't have the courage to speak up, you have to live with whatever anybody else decides,
Exactly.
So yeah, so they are moving forward with the book, and then they find out that this Zava is leaving Juventus.
Oh, well, but even before Zava, going back to Trent, I feel like they brought in Trent the way they brought in Jamie.
Oh,
It
how
has
so?
that same feel. Well, most people did not want Jamie back, right?
Oh. Well, you mean when they brought him back the second,
Brought back to the
yeah.
team.
Okay.
And now it's like, even though Trent is like writing a book and it might be critical of Richmond, I think Ted is also being like, we're going to welcome Trent to the team. Trent might be a good addition to the team, which is fascinating because no one wanted Jamie back, right? And no one wants Trent back, or no one wants Trent there. But then again, Ted is bringing this new person into the team in some way.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now we get to see Trent on a regular basis, which I'm getting excited about.
I love it. I really like him. But I will say I don't think that the rest of the team doesn't want him there. I think it's only Roy who doesn't want him there.
Well, no, but doesn't Rebecca and Higgins and
Oh.
Keeley, they all don't want him there. I'm talking about that.
That's true. They don't.
And they didn't want, and Higgins and
right. Okay, I see.
yeah, a lot of them didn't.
I thought you meant the team. Okay.
Yeah, not the team. Yeah, not the players.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. All right. So then we see Zava, we learn about Zava. And the reason that he's coming to England is because his wife binged The Office, the British version of The Office, not the American. The pre-make. And there was a lot of talk about this in a bunch of the articles, but that Zava is actually a fictionalized version of
Zlatan.
Yeah, of real life Swedish.
Ibrahimovic.
Yeah, real life Swedish star Zlatan
Ibrahimovic. Yep.
Ibrahimovic. Okay. I don't know. Like, I haven't seen him play in real life and stuff.
So he's really good, right? I don't think he's the best ever, but he thinks he's the best ever. And at one point, not only played with the top teams in Europe, but then he came and played for the LA Galaxy. And in like his first touch in his first game ever, he scores a goal. So like everyone considers him like a god, but here's a great, this is a perfect example of Zlatan. So I think LeBron James sent him a signed like autograph when he got there. It was either it was LeBron or Kobe, someone welcome to LA. And what Zlatan did was he signed the poster and then sent it back.
Oh, well, that tells you everything, doesn't it?
So that tells you everything about this dude. Like, this dude talks in the third person. He literally is like, Zlatan will not answer that question. He's like that. It's ridiculous. And he looks like that dude.
Yeah.
He looks very similar to that dude.
Yeah, and we will see him a little bit later when they actually go to Chelsea. And so he's played by, oh gosh, Maximilian. Oh, the name just went out of my head. I'll find it and then come back to it. But one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning and to ask you is any kind of overarching themes for this episode?
Oh, I don't know yet. I think they're going to appear as we continue to talk.
Okay.
But yeah, not yet.
So for me, the themes that kind of stood out were origin stories and like second chances. And then like regrets, the second chances and regrets kind of going together. So those were the two that kind of showed up for me. And so
Zava is there, right? He's leaving Juventus. He's as they describe him, he's a huge diva. He goes through teams like he goes through manicures. He's played for 14 teams, in like 15 seasons. And he wants to come to the Premier League. So now there's this competition between Chelsea, West Ham, and Richmond are like, well, could we get him even though we can't afford him? And what's interesting about that moment right there is they got all excited and they're leaving. And then Trent, who they didn't want to first be there, but now Trent is like able to read tea leaves, reads it so well. And he's like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that you simply want to get Zava simply because your ex-husband wants him? And she's like, yes. And he's like, I love that.
Yeah.
And it's Zabadabadoo.
But backing up from there, he picks up on it because when she initially starts out, she's like, he's a diva, he's this, why would anyone want him? And then as soon as she hears that West Ham is interested, then she just, without missing a beat, is like, but who doesn't like working with a diva? And so that's where he like really cues in on that. And good for her. Like, and meanwhile, you see all the three of them now, Ted, Keeley, and Higgins, like saying, don't say it. And she's like,
right.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to do exactly what Ted did. I'm going to speak my mind. And like, this is going to be a good book. Like, regardless of what happens this season, this is going to be a good book.
Yeah, yeah. So then, like, they all leave the office and stuff, and Ted and Keely chat for a couple of minutes.
And I love that discussion they had, right? Because she
Yeah.
goes, I wish my coworkers would loosen up.
Yeah.
And she's like, maybe I get a shaman and we do ayahuasca. Like, talk about like such an extreme, because she so badly wants to connect with them. And then he's just like, well, I was just thinking you go outside of the office, like maybe an escape room or something.
Right. So he suggests, when she says, I wish they'd loosen up, he says, well, maybe you should go out with them. And then she does the blood moon thing. And then he says, oh, well, I was thinking about the escape room. But yeah, the ayahuasca, I just think like she wants to connect with people on such a deep level so
quickly,
fast. Yeah.
Quickly. Exactly. Yes. Quickly. As quick as possible.
Which I think is really cute. And so that conversation ends and we've got lots of moments of comedy as usual. So that's where like I think it's funny that people are complaining that this season isn't as funny, because I'm like, there's so many moments of comedy. So then there's Isaac who comes out who wants a shoe deal. No particular brand.
Just shoes.
Just shoes in general. Like he wanted only Rolos last time. Not sweets or candy, but just Rolos.
Right.
Like Isaac knows what he likes. And then you see Jamie like come out, and it's really fun to see him like all nervous talking to her, right? Like he's stuttering over his words and not complete sentences and stuff. And then we see Roy come in, and I just loved this scene with Isaac and Jamie at the water cooler.
Who knew that he knew body science? That Isaac of any people knows what kinesis is? Kinesis is. And it's so good because he's like, no eye contact, Roy's clenched ass. I'm like, what? He's like, it's science. It's clearly they broke up at science. He doesn't even mention the bag being passed to her, of like all of her stuff and things like that. But that is fascinating. And what I found even more fascinating about that part was then what Jamie did, because I'm thinking, ooh, Jamie's like, opportunity, time for me to swoop in on Keely. And he doesn't. He doesn't. And I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah, I love that. I think Jamie has really had one of the biggest growth arcs in this show. Like when you think about the very first episode of the show and how he left the locker room early when Ted showed up to talk to everyone and stuff. And you look at him now where you're right. Like he had that opportunity to follow her and be like, are you okay? Blah, 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 and swoop in. But he goes to check on Roy. What I thought was funny is that Roy like ducks into the boot room, which we saw last season is where like all the secrets get spilled, right? It's like the boot room, and poor little Will is always in the background, just
always in the back of the boot room. No, because then they're talking about, and he's like, I learned you broke up with Keely. He's like, who told you? He's like, I use body science, right? And then they stop Will, and they're like, Will, don't say anything. And Will's like, well, I had a breakup recently, and if you all want to, maybe we should all go out. We'll be like the single guys. It's like, we're the new, what is it? Diamond dogs. And he's like, or I could just keep my mouth shut, like, okay.
Yeah, that was cute. But yeah, like, so Jamie is genuinely concerned. And I think like they had a real turning point last season during that Man City game where like that big hug, right? Like where Roy went and just hugged him because he knew like what that felt like, and or what Jamie was going through in that moment. And so I think that was kind of a turning point from them now. And especially like, and so now he's coming out to comfort Roy, but Roy, it's so like when he goes in for the hug and Roy's just like, what are you doing? And you came at me too fast. And it's just
he
like
did
the
come
whole
at him
scene.
pretty fast. Also, they're both trying to figure it out. They're both trying to figure out how to do this thing. And he's like, it's called empathy. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it.
That's the other funny thing, right? So when he initially went, like tilted his head to the side and went, I was like, oh, is he making fun of him? And then, but he genuinely thinks that that's what empathy is. And the funny thing is everybody. So like when the locker room reacts to Roy, they all do the side held. And then when he goes to Chelsea and the guy, the usher, does the same thing. And I'm just like, wow, that's hilarious that's how they're portraying empathy. Is this
Oh
like,
my gosh.
And so, yeah, I just thought that was really funny. And just Jamie's lines in that whole scene are so like the whole thing about, I forget how skittish old people are because of the war.
Because of the war. And you're like, what war?
So, yeah.
But also Roy thinks he's there. He's like, you want to know if it's okay to ask her out. Right. Like
Yeah.
he's like thinking the worst of him, or thinking he's just going to go back to his old ways. And he's not. And that just blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. He's making assumptions, right? Instead of asking, like, why are you, like, what's your real motive for being here or whatever.
Right. Meanwhile, Will's like, hey, we all want to get some fish bowls together, which is hilarious. Just a hilarious image to think of Will hanging out with them.
All right.
Getting some fish bowls and talking about their single guys club.
I just don't know when Jamie even saw him back there. Because it did look like, I kept watching it. I'm like, he walks in, he doesn't look back at all. But yeah, I just thought that was really funny. And the fact that it took place in the boot room, I just thought was really cute.
Right.
And then we go back to
the office where Ted is like reading one of the soccer strategy books for the first time ever. Now I'm wondering why did you think he was reading those books?
I think he's starting to get nervous. Like, I think he's starting to feel like there's a lot of pressure because everyone's saying like, oh, you got to take the whole thing now. That's what you're here for. And there's a part of me that just feels like he's like trying different things to, like that's not his style. That's Beard's style. That's not Ted's style. Interestingly, that Inverting the Pyramid book is the one that Beard is reading when they were on their flight to England in the very first episode.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. And then can we just talk about for a second, like Beard's little screams in this whole
I love
episode?
all the screams.
They're hilarious. It's so perfectly timed. Like his timing on this has been really funny. Okay, but so the guy playing Zava is Maximilian Ozinski, and he was also in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't know if you saw that, but
okay, no.
Yeah. But yeah, so then there's that whole situation in the locker room, and we're like, they can't communicate. Like everyone's
such
confused.
Bad communication all around. But this is how rumors happen in the office, right? Like no one is understanding anyone, right? They're going back and forth, and then they're like, at one point, it'd be like, "Why would Zava write a book about Trent Krim? Like, I just don't understand." And they start arguing about that.
Well, that's where like if you don't use like actual like names of people, it does get confusing sometimes. And so, yeah, so that whole like thing was just pure comedy again. And then Roy walks in and we find out that the whole reason everyone's upset because it wasn't about Zava. It wasn't about Trent Krim. It was about hearing that Roy and Keeley broke up. And then we see Ted and like we hear Beard and then we see Ted kind of like faint,
And I'll go back just to the confusion part. That's such good writing, right?
Yeah.
Because it has that who's on first comedy vibe to it.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to write all that down, and it's really hard to actually follow. Yet at the same time, you're like, oh, I understand why he feels that way. So I'm so confused, yet it was so well written.
Yeah, it was really well written. And then Roy actually walks in, and the whole team empathizes together.
They're like, oh, which just makes him even more angry.
I know. And he's like, he's about to go after Jamie, right?
Yeah, and he thinks Jamie is about it with like, who probably said it? Isaac, probably Isaac.
Oh, yeah, I'm guessing Isaac. Yeah. And then Ted like wants to send Will back to his house to get Ted's breakup mix. And Ted's like, what? I mean, Will's like, what's the CD?
Right. And as if Roy wants that CD. Like that's the last thing he wants. And then Coach Beard almost faints when he finds out.
So Coach says, I'll go get it. Coach Beard says, I'll go get it.
Right.
And Ted throws his keys at him and Beard doesn't even turn around. He's like, I've got a set. And then you think he's leaving, but he comes back in when Roy says, well, I broke up with her. And then we hear that scream again. But interestingly, if you go into Apple Music, you can find Ted's breakup mix in Apple Music.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, and there's like a whole bunch of really good songs on there.
That is awesome.
So, yeah. And then we get this first inkling of Roy has an issue with Trent Krim. So Trent Krim arrives, and it's Roy who, like, because Ted's welcoming him and all this stuff. And Roy yells and forbids anyone to talk to him, right?
Yeah, if anyone says anything to him, I'm going to headbutt you.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what Zava did to that guy in the grocery store.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right.
Huh. Interesting. So 2 things. Number 1 is Danny trying to sound tough is just too funny, right? Like, because he's like, "Woo!" And then, like, everyone's like, "What are you doing?" And then he's like, "Well, fuck off, Trent Cribb." And it was just like, you could tell he's so uncomfortable, right?
You can tell the whole team is uncomfortable because they don't want to. They're an inviting team, right? They welcome everybody.
Yeah.
They've welcomed everyone from all over the world. Why wouldn't they welcome Trent Cribb?
Yeah. But the other part that I thought was hilarious was if you really look at through this whole scene and you watch Phil Dunster, who plays Jamie, he's in the background trying not to crack
Yeah,
up.
he almost busts out laughing a few times when Roy walks off. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was funny. And then we get to Keely's commercial shoot, which we kind of talked about, right? Like she's in this space, she's got all these ideas, and nobody's really taking her seriously. Like they're actually saying to her face, like, I don't think she does get it.
Right. Right.
And we meet her friend Shandy Fine, played by Abreen Razia. And it almost feels like there's this person there who now, like, she does know her and she feels safe with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Shandy has like some great ideas right there to help them save money and still make the shoot a success and all of that.
Well, but also Shandy, I love how, because in a really quick way, basically describes what Keely's life used to be, right? She's like, well, what's going on with the girls? And they're like, married a football player, married a footballer, married a footballer. I married a footballer, but then I divorced a footballer and now I'm here. Right. So, and the fact that they say, I saw you on Vanity Fair fully clothed, you made it out all by yourself. And that is fascinating. Like that whole description and that whole, like, and maybe one day I'll be able to make it out myself. Right.
Yeah.
And then she literally saves her tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, because that group was like, yeah, we need 100 more people. And the person's like, no, you don't. We can easily do it through this suggestion that saves the day for Keely and also make sure that she doesn't get in trouble with her CFO.
And it is a little bit of her origin story coming out, right? Like to your point, like we are learning little bits about like what her life might have been like, what it was like before, even just the comment about like the short skirts and stuff like that, right? Like we are hearing all these things. And let's just talk about Keely and Shandy. And so then later on, we see Shandy in Keely's office now. And, and they're talking and stuff. And you can tell that Keely finally feels like super comfortable. She's got someone there. And then Barbara comes in, is just so rude and condescending.
So mean.
Right. And I love this moment because it's one of those pivotal moments that I think a lot of leaders experience in their leadership, right? It's that moment of knowing that somebody on your staff has done something that is not okay.
Yep.
And acknowledging it to the person who's been wronged. So in this case, she says to Shandy, she says, I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah.
And then she says, I'm going to take care of this. And
she does it immediately.
And I think that, like, number one, that takes a lot of courage. It's not easy to have those kinds of conversations and to call people out when they've done something, because it's conflict inducing potentially, right? And so, or it's steeped in conflict to begin with. And so the fact that she has made this choice that, I'm the leader here, I need to step up and do the right thing. And she goes to Barbara's office, she closes the door, and she's very direct with her. I need to talk to you. You can't talk to people that way. That's not okay. And then I love when she sees the snow globes.
She stops. She stops in the middle of berating her. And it's just like, that's a lot of snow globes.
Yeah. And she gets curious, right?
Yes.
Well, what's that about?
Curious. Just be curious, right?
Yeah. And you can see Barbara like starts to get like almost embarrassed, like, oh, well, I guess it's silly. Like they send me places, I get them. I guess it's silly. And instead of that was like for some leaders, it could have been an opportunity to be like, yeah, like, and put her down in some way. But instead, Keely uses that as an opportunity to connect
Yeah.
and, compliments her on it. And I was reading in one of the Facebook groups, someone said, I just have this feeling she's going to make the whole office into like this glittery, happy snow globe. And you could totally see her doing that, right?
Yeah.
But I like what she says at the end, which is maybe you and I can see how good it feels to believe in someone else together.
Right. Well, part of the reason why that resonates is because I thought the snow globes represented the fact that she's been moved around a lot. Is that what you saw? I didn't just see it as her just visiting many places. I saw it as that she's
Oh,
had many leaders and she's been moved around a lot and she really has no connection to people. She just sees each thing as she's brought in to manage money and make sure that it doesn't go over budget. And that's it. But she has no other connection besides the globes to wherever she's at. And Keely's like, no, we're gonna actually. I'm saying I'm believing. You're gonna believe in Shandy. I'm believing in you, and you need to believe in us. And that
yeah.
all is happening right here. And I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
okay, Keely.
I hadn't really put that together, but that makes a lot of sense. I took it as like they send her to a lot of places for short amounts of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did see it in that way. And I agree. And I saw it as there aren't deep connections made. It's just this. And snow globes are like the idealized version of a place, right?
Right.
And so, like, she's got these little idealized versions of each place with no real connection to anywhere. But I'm curious now if but so you don't mean that it's because she's not good at her job or anything like that. It's
No,
just,
not that
okay.
she's not good
Okay.
at her
So
job.
then,
It's
yeah, I
more
think
the
we're on the
idea
same
of like
page. Yeah.
she's never been in any place for a long period of time.
Yeah.
That so she doesn't feel part of any team.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a kid that gets moved around a lot. You just aren't able to build a lot of connections so you don't trust anyone to build connections with because you're going to get moved again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
No, I
like
think that makes sense.
way too many snow globes on there. So
I
you're like,
know.
clearly she's been everywhere, yet nowhere.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting though. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's going to be an interesting kind of relationship to watch between Keely and Barbara, but also between Keely and Shandy, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that we see Keely stepping into this role of mentorship and leadership. And Shandy is probably where Keely was many years ago.
Right, right.
Right.
Especially when she sends her the text of like, let's use your company card for some of those mimosas. And it's just like, okay. Do you remember that?
I don't think that was in this episode, was
No,
it?
it is. She gets the text while she's at the game, and
Oh,
it's from Shandy, and that's what it
right. Okay.
says.
Yeah. 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 You're right.
So then Keely's like, okay, I realize I'm gonna have to like rein her in a little bit.
Which even then she says, "Oh yeah, she's full of ideas."
Full
you
of
know.
ideas.
So, yeah, uh, yeah. And so a good chunk of this takes place at. Oh, actually, I just want to say one other. So I want to talk about the Trent Roy thing because I thought that was really beautifully done. And
Mm-hmm.
so Trent, comes into Richmond, and the song that's playing is "A Well-Respected Man" by the Kinks, and so that's a
Uh,
great song, and it feels very appropriate to Trent. But I think it's hilarious that that Ted suggested that they share the office because Roy can't stand him, and Trent's like, "Okay." And so that whole thing was so funny too, where Trent's like trying to make conversation, and you see Roy, like, first of all, his desk is covered. It's
covered, covered in balloons and C cards. Oh my gosh. Who wrote the C card? I don't even know who. It said Liz. I was like,
it
who's
said
Liz?
Liza. And
Who's
so
Liza?
Liza works at the club, and we see her. I looked this up. That's why she says hi to Ted in season 2, episode 6. Like when that day when he's coming in and talking to everybody, Liza's one of the people that he talks
Okay.
to. And so,
So
yeah, it's
random people, random staff are writing him. Oh, that's awesome.
like
I love it.
everybody knows that they've broken up, right? But so we get a little Trent asking the question and just planting the seed for us that this is going to be Roy's first time back at Chelsea since he retired.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that that was actually really interesting to kind of think about because I don't know, like we wouldn't have known that otherwise, right? But when he starts popping those balloons one
Oh,
at a
and the
time, that was
balloon popping. That's when I was just like, I love this dynamic. This is the new awesome dynamic.
But let's fast forward to when they're at Chelsea, right? And so now they're in the locker room. The first half is finished. And Jamie, again, is stepping into his leadership, trying to like share something. And Trent walks in. And to the team's credit, I mean, they all shut up. And
Yep.
we saw it earlier when Trent walked into the locker room at Richmond. Everyone shut up. And so they all stopped talking. And what I love is I think there's an element of we see Ted coming back into his leadership as well, to where he pulls Roy aside and he doesn't even like sugarcoat it. He's like, your ego is getting in the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Your ego is getting in the way of not just this, but this game, but the team.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, which maybe that's the theme. That's the theme that I pick up on, because it's just like Keely taking care of it in the moment, facing your fear in the moment and having the hard conversation right then and there.
Yeah.
And then Roy has his difficult conversation right then and there. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so that was one of the issues we saw lacking last season, right? Is all the times Nate was leading with his ego, nobody was calling him out on it.
That's true.
Right. And so we see that there's been like a correction, and Ted is now like, nope, we're not going to let this drag on.
Yep.
And he tells him, like, look, you got to fix this. And I loved that scene where we see that vulnerability that, you know, Roy is hurt. So again, hurt people, right? And Trent had written this article when Roy was 17 years old. And it devastated him, and it got in his head, and it made him just think that he was not good enough. And I just thought that like the whole like scene itself was really amazing, and how he explains it. And then he says, well, you know who wrote this, right? Trent says, yeah, I wrote it. And Trent was also up and coming and trying to make a name for himself, right? But he was
saying he was trying to be edgy, because when he wrote it, he goes, I mean, it's mean, right? He's like, newcomer Roy Kent is overhyped, cold prodigy with unbridled rage, and is going to be a profound disappointment. And then Roy's like,
not gonna be.
Is a profound disappointment. And he's like, I was 17, man.
Yeah.
17. And I've been carrying this around for now over 20 years. Yikes.
Yeah. I mean, and that tells you, right? The fact that he's been carrying it in his wallet this whole time. But to Roy's credit, Trent acknowledges it, says he's sorry, and Roy forgives him. And like, he's like, okay. And that's it. And I was like, wow, like that is not easy, right? That is not easy, especially if you've carried something around for that long.
Yeah.
To just let it go and be like, all right, I forgive you. But I think this goes to that idea of second chances. Like he's going to give Trent a second chance here, and it's going to benefit everyone, right? And so I thought that was just really beautifully done, the way that
this
they brought
goes also to the idea of difficult conversations, right? And that when you go into one not trying to win, but trying to understand, like something magical can come from that. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to have more conversations. Just like Keely and the CFO are not going to have more conversations. But at least now you've built some sort of foundation of respect.
Yeah.
And then it's so simple, because then Roy just comes back in and he's just like, you can talk to him now. And they're like, oh, thank goodness. Oh, my goodness. I've been wanting to say things forever. And then Jamie goes right back to being like, yo, we can dribble up. And what I loved about this was they don't belittle the audience. They actually talk about soccer strategy and being like, they're giving us the lane and they're just letting us dribble up. And then they're actually then do that during the game. And it's like, oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because typically they do that when they don't think a team is very talented. They'll just let them hold on to the ball. So I was like, oh, look at this. Look what's happening here.
Yeah. And so we get like little bits of Roy and Trent's origin stories in that moment too, right? So we're getting to learn about what is it that has made them become who they are in this moment, right? And so so I really like that whole thing with them. And to tie up kind of Roy and Trent's story when we get to the end of the day and we're back in the coach's office. We see Roy sitting there and he rips up the article. And it's like this thing has been lifted. This thing that's he's carried for all these years has lifted and it's gone now. And then when Ted kind of asked them each, like, what are you doing for the weekend or whatever, or no, he asked him, how is it to be back at Chelsea?
Right.
And Roy's response about it being kind of sad. And I had this moment of like, I could totally relate to this because he talks about how, his last season playing there, he played that game against Arsenal. And it was the first time that he started to think about how he just couldn't keep up anymore. He wasn't good enough. And he just thought about it the rest of the year and then decided to just leave before anybody else could tell him. Yep. And it was such a perfect example of, again, going back to this idea of the inner critic, like the things that our inner critic says to us. And I do a workshop called Embracing Your Inner Critic. And part of this is the idea that if we can learn to understand that that voice in our head it's not doing this out of malice or anything bad. It's actually trying to protect us, right? Right. It's trying to say all the terrible things that we in some place in our minds believe that others are saying about us or will say about us. Yep. And so it's better I just say it all about myself before anybody else can do it.
Yep.
But the problem is that a lot of times it's not true and we make decisions based off of it. And so in his case, he left a place that he loved, doing something he really loved, right? And it just felt so familiar. And I remember a few years ago, like I was in this mindfulness class and part of it is we had to do this hike. And it was right after my mom died. And I was just like, I wasn't in a great place. And I hadn't been exercising and I wasn't feeling good. And I just kept thinking, there's no way I can climb that thing. Like, and I'm in this class full of elite athletes and Navy SEALs and all this stuff. And, like they're being told, I know you're going to want to run up this mountain, but I was like, what? Who wants to run up a mountain?
Who wants to run up the mountain? That's not my motivation.
Like, I couldn't even relate to that,
Like, I don't even want to be on this mountain, let alone running up it. I know you want to sprint up the whole thing. No, I don't. I want a mimosa right now. That's what I want.
And so we were told, like, try to notice what thoughts are coming up and stuff and just listen to your thoughts, listen to your body, but don't judge it. Don't, just let go of it. And what I noticed was like, there was so much negativity, right? Like comparison, like, oh, look at all these people that are passing you. And, oh, look at all these people who are already done and this and that. And I finally had to get to a moment where, like, when I really started listening to my body and what my body needed in the moment and following, and I started just playing this game with myself, right? Like, I'm just going to walk to the next switchback. And if I get to the next switchback and I want to turn around, like, I can turn around, it'll be fine. And I climbed that thing just one switchback at a time. And when I got up to the top, all I could think about was like, how many things in my life have I have I like missed out on because I told myself I couldn't do it, and that had I just looked at the next switchback and just done like little pieces one by one, that I might have gotten to something big. Right.
Yeah.
And so that when I heard him say that, I was just like, yes, like that felt so familiar to me.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was fascinating when Ted goes, well, lots of folks feel better to quit than get fired. Right. And Roy was so worried about being one of those broken down football players. But when he says that part, when he goes, well, there's a part of me thinking maybe I should have stayed and just enjoyed myself. Right. And that's like, that part is also fascinating because then that makes you think of like his relationship with Keely. Right. Yes. And like, he could have just enjoyed it rather than like run away from it, worrying that something bad is going to happen. But how many of us have left something early because we're like almost too vulnerable? It's getting into a vulnerable spot. I don't know. Let me get out of this before I start feeling feelings I've never felt before.
Yeah. Or let me get out of this before the other person decides that I'm not good enough or that I'm not worthy enough to be here. But the thing that really clinches it at the end there is he says, but that's just not who I am, I guess. Right. And so he's already told himself, like, why do you even bother? Like, that's not who you are. And Ted says, not yet.
Not yet.
Ted and I love that.
Not yet. That curiosity, the curiosity of like, you know? But
Yeah.
then I love what he says, but then he goes, and Ted goes, if you hadn't left Chelsea, we wouldn't have met. Like, just smiling like that. And then he's like, good night. And I think what I also loved about that was, Trent remembers that game. Trent probably wrote about that game. He was just like, Roy even turns to him, he goes, I played horrible that game. And he's like, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact that Roy is like looking at Trent and going, I'm about to share something very personal and you are in the room. Okay, fine. I'm going to
Exactly.
do this.
Exactly.
And that's only after he tears up that paper that he can actually go there.
Exactly. And I love this, I think the term not yet is so powerful,
Yes.
right? Because with anything, if you add the word yet at the end of it, like there's so many things in our lives that, okay, I may not be good at this yet, but I have the capacity to practice or do whatever to shift that, right? And it's this way of shifting our mindset a little bit to bring in that yet. And so I really liked that. And
there's an awesome coach by the name of Khan Ramkisoon who taught me this idea of when they are taking on something new, they just remind themselves that they are just learning this, right? And that instead of thinking like, I'm just not an expert, it's just like, I'm not an expert yet, right? And that Khan once said, when they go outside, sometimes they pretend the whole outside is like improv and they're just walking around the room or walking outside, like, and any person they experience is like improv. And I remember doing that same vibe at a conference and being like, I'm not comfortable yet. But as I started playing it more and more, I don't know, I was able to do things that I never thought I could do. And it was Khan that taught me this.
Yeah, it's very powerful, I think. And the song that's playing towards the end there, and it's interesting, like Ted, once everybody leaves and he's just kind of sitting there thinking, and it makes you wonder, so you kind of get the impression that Roy's talking about, his football career, but like you said, also his relationship with Keely, right? Also makes you wonder if Ted's thinking about his relationship with his family as well.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And that kind of heaviness at the end, like the sigh that he has too. And so there's a not yet in there for him too. We don't know what it is yet. But the song that's playing, I really love. It's by Andrew Bird. It's called Night's Falling, and that's what plays over the credits. And it's all about like this young bird, right? And it's about the night's falling, but take courage, you're not alone. You're far from home, but you're not alone. And so again, it comes back to that idea that, you've got this community around you. And so it'll be curious to see like how each of them taps into that as they move forward,
Right. And then as Trent's leaving, he's like, sport, it's quite a metaphor.
Yeah.
And then Ted's like, it also makes a heck of a nickname. And then you're like, and I'm like, huh? And then he's like, good night, sport. And I'm like, oh, I love this. I just love these writers. I love these writers. I don't care what anyone else says, writers. I love you.
Yeah. These are honestly, it's like probably one of my favorite writing rooms of all time. Okay. So then let's talk about Rebecca, Rupert, and Zava. Because that's the other big,
that is a
big
fun
thing here.
That is so much fun what happens there.
Yeah. So we've got Rebecca, they're at Chelsea, and sorry, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the locker room where everyone is talking about Zava and they're on the pitch and Danny runs up to
Jamie.
Yeah. And that whole exchange, he's like, I haven't been this nervous since I played in El Chapo's youth league.
I didn't even pick up on that.
I thought that was so funny.
Or when Rojas is like, do you think Zava saw me? Because that is a whole thing too between Jamie and Zava, because Jamie's feeling like, because everyone loves Zava
Jamie's
so much.
Not impressed. Yeah.
He's
Jamie's
not
like,
impressed. But also Jamie used to have Zava-like tendencies.
Oh, for sure.
So, talk about prima donna, like he does it to another level.
Yeah.
But I will say one last thing about Roy is just like, I love when he walks back into the locker room and he's like, you can now talk to this prick, and everyone is all relieved. But I just love how he said it.
Yeah.
That way. And
I also loved the love that he got from the Chelsea fans when he walked out.
Yeah.
Like, that was actually really beautiful too. That,
and then he acknowledges them, which is really a big deal.
Yeah.
and also that he remembers even some of the staff. The fact that he remembered that guy and he's like, "How are you?" Like, oh, just so beautiful.
But what's interesting is you've got that, and then it the Zava showing up cuts into that, right? And so
because he's the new Roy.
Exactly. So when we get to the end and Roy's talking about that sadness, like it all like you can see how it all pieces together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really thought that was nice. Okay. So Rebecca is not, she's convinced that Rupert's going to get Zava because Rupert always gets everything he wants. And we start to get a little bit of Rebecca's backstory, her origin story, right?
Which is so fascinating.
Right? Yeah. So what came up for you as you heard that?
Well, first it's hilarious, Higgins and her, because she's like, "Jinx, don't say anything about Zava, because then you're gonna jinx it, and then Rupert's gonna get him." But when she shares the story, when they're watching the game, and she's seeing Rupert do his thing with Zava and making Zava feel like the most important person in the room, and it takes her back to when she was a waitress at this whatever restaurant that Rupert used to hang out.
She was a bartender.
She was a bartender, right?
Yeah.
This bartender at this, restaurant, and Rupert comes in with his wife and still is like buying drinks for the whole room and is just the life of the party, and then comes back and gives all of his attention to her, and then does it over and over and over again each time, and then says, "I don't even care if we go out. I just want to get to know you." Like, oh man. And really making someone feel that special. Like, I started feeling special. I started feeling like, ooh, I want that Rupert type energy. And then now to see him do that with Zava, and he already did that with the person that he got pregnant, and just like he just does that over and over again. Like, oh, it's she clearly hasn't gotten over that part of it. It's still so fresh.
Yeah. And Keely's line about it's a fine line between stalking and romance, right? Like, I think that's actually, it was a very perceptive comment. But yeah, like, I think we talked about this before, this idea of grooming people. And I feel like this is how narcissists or just these master manipulators, this is what they do, right? To get what they want. They know all the right things to say. And so we've already seen it with, he says all the right things to Nate because he knows exactly what Nate needs to hear to feel valued. And so that he will get into this place where he's going to do whatever Rupert wants because Rupert has told him all the right things. And so in that same way, he did the same thing to Rebecca. He said all the right things over and over again until all he had to do was ask. And she's like, okay, she knew he was married. She knew all of that. And initially she was like, no, I'm not going to go out with you. You're married, and it just took him making her feel this way, making her feel chosen by saying all the right things that got her to change, her, like, go against her own values. Right. And it's a form of power that we see a lot of leaders use. And it's not great.
No, I mean, it's not just not great, it's scary, right?
Yeah.
But then it also comes from talking about Rupert's crisis from previous episode, is just like, this is his only way of interacting with human beings. He must own them, right? He must like get them like trophies, and he has no ability to just simply be human and have a connection with someone else. So now he wants to own Zava, and this is happening in real time, and Rebecca is seeing this. And at one point I was getting frustrated because I was like, Rebecca, why are you just talking about it? Why don't you do something about it? And then finally she gets up and she's just like, I can do this too. And I was like, okay, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I love that, right? Because it's a great example of like how patterns get broken.
Yes. Right.
Because she got to make a different choice this time.
Right.
And when she initially goes over there, she's not let in. And then Rupert shows up, right? In his long coat, by the way, which looks very
Death Star-like.
Death Star-like.
Very emperor, very much like an emperor. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's dark too, where they see him.
Yeah. And we see that old pattern of how he treats her.
Yep.
Right. And in the past,
right in front of Zava.
Yeah. And so if it made me think about like that episode with the gala and like how he
Yep.
talked to her there and how
Mhm.
she just kind of shut down and she was crying and she was upset and she just kind of gave in, right? She made him the MC and or the like the
Mhm.
announcer and all that stuff. But this time she makes a different choice, right? Because this time she can see it and she is able to be like, nope, I'm going to do it differently. And so she goes after like, well, even the way he introduces Zava, right? This is my ex-wife and da da da. Like,
Right.
rather than, she's this woman who owns a football club. Like she's the one who has to say like, "Oh, and I'm the owner of Richmond." Right?
Mhm. And both their vibe, at first I was just like, oh, it's gonna go really bad for her because Zava's like, it's a pleasure for you to meet me.
Yeah.
So like there are already two narcissists she's dealing with in that
Yeah.
room
Yeah.
at that very moment. And then I was like, well, I guess this is just it. And she's just gonna go back up to the box. And then she goes into the bathroom, this crappy ass bathroom, and literally berates this dude all while he's peeing, and you can hear the pee the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and she's just somebody said in one of these groups, I just imagined Rebecca doing her getting big pose before she walks into the bathroom.
Oh, right. Right.
I don't know. I don't even know that she needed that because she was like fired up.
She
And
was, dude.
yeah, and she was just like telling him all the stuff, right? You're going to go to a team where they're going to win regardless of if you're there. And
Yep.
you'll never have to wonder if you're still as good as you say you are. But you and I both know you're overrated, you're overpaid. All the things that Roy was worrying about all
Yep.
those years ago, right? That people would say. And she obviously like makes a
And you eat too much fucking asparagus. Like, just to remind you, he's peeing this entire time as if you didn't know, right? She's
Yeah.
like right up in his face saying
Yeah.
all this stuff. I just love that part.
And there's an element of like she has no more like fucks to give about this
Right.
anymore, right? Like she's kind of hit her limit and she's like, you know what? He's not going to come to us anyway. So what do
Mhm.
I care? And it's often in those moments that we see like the biggest like things happen, right?
Right.
And so
Because she's let go of the results at this point, right? She's now
exactly.
playing and just being like, forget it. I'm doing whatever I want. And then,
Exactly.
and then she comes back to hang out with Higgins and Keeley and she's like, how did it go? And she's like, oh, did you get him? And it was like, what's the opposite of that? And she's
Well,
like,
no, because she
sour.
said, yeah, because
Yeah.
he said, did you sweet talk him? And she said,
Oh,
what's
yeah.
the opposite of that?
Sour
yell.
yell.
I love that. I'm like, I'm going to use that. Sour
So
yell.
like I feel at the same time that Richmond is gaining confidence is like we can actually beat Chelsea or at least tie Chelsea today.
Mhm.
She's gaining confidence as she challenges Zava at that moment.
And by extension, Rupert, right? Like,
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
not going to allow you to put me in a corner or make me feel bad anymore because I can play at your level.
Right.
And I'm capable of doing that.
And then the contrast when they both find out what Zava chose is Rupert sitting in his limo waiting for, of course, what's going to happen. They're going to choose me. And Rebecca doesn't even want to watch. She has no desire to even watch. She doesn't even want to see it.
Yeah. So, well, but I think part of that is because she figures it's not going to
Right.
go their way anyway, But yeah. So I thought that was actually really clever.
And then Zava goes, I have changed. Zava will not play for Chelsea. Zava will play for Richmond.
And everyone's
May
like,
I keep this pen?
And you see the Chelsea manager like
It's
mouthing to his
he's
people.
like, what? A WTF? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? And then they start and then you gotta love the fans. You gotta love those three fans and the what is the owner of the bar.
Oh yeah,
where they're
May.
like Zava, Zava. Like they've already come up with a song for Zava.
Right after, but that they cut to that when Jamie says the fans aren't gonna like this.
Right.
Right. And then they cut to the fans and they're like thrilled. But to your point, like I think for as good as this guy is, his reputation precedes him. So while it's gonna be good for a while, like it's not gonna be so good at some point. So
Right.
that's gonna be really interesting to watch to see kind of how that comes about. So.
And also how Ted's gonna handle it, right? Because Ted has handled a diva before in Jamie, right?
Mhm.
And did that whole Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice
Yeah.
talk. Is at some point he's going to have to do that to Zava? Like, this is interesting
Except
because
that
then
I don't know, like, I I feel like a speech like that wouldn't have worked on a Zava,
probably,
you know? So it will
probably.
be interesting to see, like, how that goes. Yeah. So any big takeaways from this episode?
Well, as I'm just thinking about it, like if Zava's joining the team, right? The team is all about team and Zava's all about Zava.
Mhm.
So this is going to be a fascinating adventure.
Yeah.
But yeah, the overall theme that I pick up on is stepping up and having that difficult conversation in real time. Because Keely has it with the CFO, Ted has it with Roy has it with Trent, and then Rebecca has it with Zava.
Yeah.
Like all four of them all step up in there, and they have to have it at that point. They have to have it at that moment. There's no other time. They need to have it at that present moment. That whole 5-second rule, Mel Robbins, right? It was just like, I got to do it. I'm going to do it right now and see what actually good could come from confronting your fears, like Ted's son, and
Mhm.
going into the sewer and having that hard conversation.
Yeah. I think the takeaway for me on this one is the not yet, that we always have an opportunity to change the trajectory that we're on, and that we may not be where we think we want to be or should be or could be, but that's not the end of the story. There's always a not yet. Not, I shouldn't ever use the word always, but there has the potential to be a not yet there so that you can change it, you know. And I love that.
Oh, I love that. That's very beautiful. Oh, so good.
Thanks.
I'm
Thanks.
already loving this season. This
I
season's so
know.
good.
I really like this season too, and it's just there's a lot of stuff. So
There's so much
I
stuff,
cannot
so
wait.
much, so layered. It's just so layered.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love you writers. I just love these writers.
I know. I know. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, we'll see you next week.
All right. Good night, sport. Zava, da da da, Zava, da da da, Zava, da 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 da.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Instagram or on our website, wwtldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other Ted heads took away from the episode or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Every rating helps us get our show in front of more listeners. To that end, we'd also ask if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, loved ones, randos on the street. You get it.
Thank you to the team at Podify for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for all our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch, or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?